I have nowhere else to go, she said. I asked, do you want to move in with me? The docking bays were worn, the lights flickered occasionally, and the hum of engines sounded older than anyone could remember. But for Elias Rowan it was perfect. Quiet, practical, and largely forgotten. Elias had spent most of his life fixing things. Not grand machines or enormous starships, but small, broken, forgotten objects. Tiny robots, old data chips, even the occasional stray drone that had lost its way. He liked giving things a home, and sometimes he gave people a home too, though he never expected anyone to stay long. On this morning, the station's cafeteria smelled faintly of recycled coffee and burnt toast. Elias was adjusting a small, hovering service droid when he noticed her. She was standing by the entrance, looking around as if the station were the first place she had ever seen. Her eyes, sharp and bright, flicked from one corner to another. She seemed out of place, not just physically, though her tall, slender frame suggested a species not native to the station. It was something else. A certain lost elegance, like a noble who had misplaced her title or a traveler who had wandered too far. "Hello," Elias said gently. The droid beeped in agreement behind him. The stranger turned toward him. Her voice was soft, yet it carried weight. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. Elias paused, unsure how to respond. He had heard this line before from travelers stranded by bureaucratic errors or ships that refused to dock. But there was something different about her. Not desperation exactly. More honesty. A quiet certainty that she really did not belong anywhere else. He wiped his hands on his sleeves and stepped closer. "Do you want to move in with me?" he asked, almost before he realized he had said it. The words hung in the air like a promise and a question at the same time. She blinked, perhaps at the audacity of the offer, perhaps at its simplicity. "Move in with you," she repeated, her voice a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Yes," Elias said, shrugging. "I've got space. Small, but it works, and I like having company sometimes." Her eyes studied him carefully. She seemed to weigh the offer, calculating something invisible to everyone else. Then slowly she nodded. "I will," she said. "Thank you." Elias smiled, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He had helped many travelers, but none quite like this. None who accepted so quickly with such quiet dignity. Her name, she told him later, was Era. She did not explain much about her past, only that she had been traveling across star systems for a long time, and somewhere along the way she had become invisible. Not literally, but in the way laws and rules of the galaxy treated her. Era's transit papers had expired, her status in her own world had been revoked, and she could not find refuge anywhere. Elias did not ask for details. He had learned long ago that sometimes the most important people in life were those who needed a place to stay, and that was enough. They left the cafeteria together, moving slowly through the station's narrow corridors. The walls were scratched, some panels loose, but Elias had a way of seeing potential where others saw decay. "You'll like my place," he said. "It's small, but it's comfortable, and it has a view." Era glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "View?" she asked. "The planet below," Elias said, opening a hatch. "The blue one, Earth." She looked down, and her eyes widened slightly. The sight of her home planet, even from orbit, seemed to settle something inside her. Elias noticed the faintest smile touch her lips. When they arrived at his habitat module, Elias unlocked the door and gestured inside. "Make yourself at home. I'll show you the basics, where to sleep, where to eat, and where not to touch my collection of broken things." Era stepped inside carefully. The room was modest, functional furniture, a small kitchenette, shelves filled with gadgets, data pads, and assorted curiosities Elias had collected over the years. Everything had its place, but it was not a place anyone would call luxurious. And yet, for some reason, she seemed to relax instantly. "This will work," she said softly, almost to herself. Elias raised an eyebrow. "It will work," he agreed. "You don't need much, do you?" Era shook her head. I need a place to stay, that is all. Over the next hours, they settled into a quiet routine. Elias showed her the sleeping area where she could adjust the gravity to her comfort. He explained the basic systems of the habitat, air recycling, temperature control, and the small hydroponic plants he grew for fresh food. Era observed everything with keen interest, asking questions occasionally but mostly listening. "You humans," she said suddenly, her tone curious, "you make so much space for others. Even when you have little, you still offer it." Elias shrugged, smiling. "We call it hospitality or maybe laziness. I like having someone around, makes the days less empty." Era considered this. "It is strange," she said finally. "In my world, everything has rules. You cannot help someone without expectation. You cannot provide shelter without obligation, but you offer freely." Elias laughed lightly. "I guess we like breaking the rules sometimes." The evening passed quietly. They shared a simple meal, talking about nothing in particular, favorite foods, small stories of travel, and the endless hum of the station outside. The lights dimmed, and the planet below glowed softly in the window. Elias watched her as she looked out, and for the first time he realized how rare it was to meet someone who had truly nowhere else to go and could still see beauty in the world. As they settled down for the night, Era spoke again. "I do not know what tomorrow will bring. I only know that today I have a place." Elias nodded, feeling a quiet pride. "Then tomorrow we'll figure out the rest together." For the first time in many cycles, Era slept without fear. The station hummed around them, and the stars outside their window continued their silent journey. In that small habitat, two very different travelers found a fragile peace, built not on power or status but on something far older and stronger: the willingness to share space and the courage to accept it. Outside, the orbital station waited for the next traveler, the next story, the next lost soul. Inside, Elias and Era began the first chapter of their own, a chapter that neither could have predicted, but both were willing to live. And somewhere deep in the quiet corridors of the station, a small service droid floated silently, beeping occasionally as if to mark the start of something extraordinary. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the habitat module, painting soft golden streaks on the walls. Elias was already up, tinkering with a small device that had refused to turn on for days. His movements were calm, precise, and familiar. Era sat quietly at the small table, observing. "Do you always wake up this early?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. Elias looked up, smiling. "Most days. The station doesn't sleep, and I like to be ready before it decides to remind me of itself." Era nodded, but did not speak further. She was busy watching the little droid Elias had repaired yesterday. It hovered awkwardly near the ceiling, blinking and spinning as if unsure of its own purpose. "You like machines," she said finally. "You repair them, care for them. But why? Most beings discard what is broken." Elias wiped his hands and leaned back. "Maybe because I understand what it feels like to be left behind. Broken things, people, they're just waiting for someone to notice them." Era was silent for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "In my world no one notices. Only the efficient, the perfect, the powerful. The rest are invisible." Elias didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at her, and for the first time he realized that she was not just a guest, she was a mirror. She was studying him, observing every small act, every quiet decision, every smile or gesture. And somehow, without saying it, she seemed to be measuring what it meant to be human. The day unfolded slowly. Elias showed Era the little things that made life in a small module functional. The way the air recycler worked, how to adjust gravity settings for comfort, and the delicate balance of hydroponic plants that kept food and oxygen in harmony. Era was meticulous, absorbing everything with the precision of someone trained to observe patterns. But unlike the rigid form she was used to, Elias' world had irregularities. Wires ran along walls in neat but imperfect loops. Tools were stacked in a way that made sense to someone who used them daily, though it might seem chaotic to an outsider. "This is unusual," Era said, tilting her head as she examined a small robotic arm Elias had fixed. "In most civilizations, efficiency is supreme. Disorder is punished, yet you allow it, you allow mistakes, and yet things still work." Elias chuckled. "Sometimes mistakes make things better, at least they make life interesting." She considered this carefully. Interesting is not usually valued, only outcomes are. The afternoon passed with small discoveries. Era began helping with minor repairs, her movements precise and elegant. At first, Elias thought she was simply being helpful. But soon he realized she was experimenting, testing how humans respond when someone intrudes on their personal space, how flexible they are when routines are broken. "You are different from others," she said at one point, handing him a tiny repaired device. "Your species adapts. You adjust, you change your environment for others, not for reward, not for advantage, but because it feels right." Elias smiled, though he felt slightly embarrassed. "We don't always get it right, but we try. Maybe that's the best part." Era's eyes softened. "It is remarkable, dangerous even in some ways. To offer so freely is to risk much, and yet you continue." They ate a simple meal together as the station rotated slowly beneath them. Small talk turned into larger conversation about places they had visited, the stars they had seen, and the countless worlds that had remained out of reach. Era spoke sparingly, choosing words that carried weight. Every sentence revealed a mind trained to predict and analyze, yet one now discovering something it could not fully calculate: human unpredictability. "You do not plan everything," she said quietly. "You act on intuition, on empathy, on what feels correct, and somehow it works. The universe does not collapse under your indecision." Elias laughed softly. "It's not perfect, but I'll take small successes over perfect failure any day." There was a pause. Era studied him, her expression unreadable. "You could teach empires to act this way. To value life for what it is, not just for what it produces." Elias shook his head. "I don't want to teach empires, I just help where I can." And that seemed to be enough. Era considered him carefully, as if weighing the value of a single human against the vastness of galaxies she had navigated. Later in the day, she wandered around the module quietly, examining Elias' collection of broken machines and scattered tools. She paused at a small shelf, looking at a cracked old datapad. "You keep what others discard," she said softly. "Everything has meaning. Everything has a story. You find value in things others forget. Perhaps that is why you see people like me." Elias looked at her, intrigued. "See you?" "Yes," she said simply. "Not as an object, not as a statistic, not as an anomaly. You notice me. You notice the unseen." Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet affirmation he did not often allow himself. He had never considered that his small acts, repairing a drone, keeping a place open for someone lost, might be extraordinary. But here she was, a mind far beyond most he had met, acknowledging it with precision and care. As evening fell, the module lights dimmed automatically, casting long shadows across the room. Era moved to the window and gazed down at the planet below. The blue and green swirls of Earth glimmered softly. "You are fortunate," she said after a moment. "Most beings do not have such a home, such a place to begin again. They wander endlessly." Elias joined her, looking out at the same view. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what really matters," he said quietly. Era nodded. "Perhaps. But I did not expect to find it here. Not with someone like you." There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable but full of recognition. Two travelers, different in origin, different in experience, yet both discovering the quiet power of human generosity. Later, Era explored a small corner of the module where Elias kept old star charts. Her fingers traced the lines of countless star systems, noting the patterns and trajectories. She made small comments about the orbits, the distances, the speed of light calculations, but always returned to Elias' methods, the way he adapted imperfect tools to achieve remarkable results. "You do not require perfection," she said, "and yet your results are effective." Elegant, unexpectedly powerful, Elias shrugged modestly. "I do what I can with what I have. I don't always think about the rest." Era's expression softened. "Humans are unpredictable. They are impossible to model. Even when logic dictates one outcome, they act in ways that confound expectation. Perhaps this is why empires fail to understand your species. You cannot be calculated, only observed." Elias looked at her, curious. "Observed? Is that what you're doing?" She gave him a faint smile. "Partly, but also learning. I am learning from you, from this, from how you live and care. There is a strength in your species I did not anticipate, quiet, subtle, yet formidable." The night grew deeper, and the station outside continued its silent orbit. Elias and Era settled into separate routines, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a sense of connection, of understanding that had not existed before. She was no longer just a guest. She was a witness to humanity in its quietest, most unassuming form, and already she was beginning to reconsider everything she thought she knew about life beyond her own kind. Before sleep, Era returned to the table where Elias had left a small notebook. She opened it and began to write, not for herself but for the record. Her handwriting was precise, almost clinical, yet each line carried awe. Humans provide without expectation. They give space, resources, care, and attention freely. They adapt. They fail. They succeed. Their unpredictability is not weakness. It is strength. And in this small module, I have begun to understand why the galaxy underestimates them. Perhaps I am learning from the strongest species I have ever encountered. Elias glanced at her notebook and smiled. "You don't need to write about me," he said softly. Era looked up. "I do not write about you. I write about humanity. You are an example." Elias nodded quietly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had not planned for this. He had not expected to be remarkable. And yet, in the quiet orbit of a fading station, humanity's simplest truth, kindness, curiosity, and adaptability, was quietly unfolding before her eyes. And for Era, a being trained to see outcomes, probabilities, and efficiency, it was more than she had ever imagined. Humans were not just survivors. They were builders of possibility, shapers of chance, and quiet creators of worlds, not with power but with willingness, with care, with space for others to exist. In the darkness, the stars glittered. And in that small habitat, humanity's quiet power began to shine. The orbital transit station had never been known for much beyond quiet traffic and the occasional wandering traveler. Yet, in the weeks following Era's arrival, something unusual began to happen. Word of the unusual pairing, an unregistered non-human refugee living with a solitary human, started spreading through channels Elias could not see. It began with whispers in docking control, a report of a high-value alien staying with a civilian, no papers, no security clearance. Then small alerts appeared in transit logs. Officials would glance at the data and shrug. But somewhere, far from the quiet module, there were minds trained to notice patterns, and they noticed this anomaly. Inside the module, Elias remained blissfully unaware of the stir he had caused. He had his routine, and Era had hers. They worked together, repaired small machines, and experimented with minor adjustments to gravity fields and power systems. Yet in the background, something was changing. "You are a curious species," Era said one morning as Elias adjusted the module's solar intake panels. "I expected humans to follow strict rules. I expected efficiency above all. But you improvise, you adapt. You create solutions no logic can predict." Elias wiped sweat from his brow. "That's one way to look at it. Another way is that we just figure out what works and don't worry too much about what the manuals say." Era considered this quietly. Then unexpectedly she laughed, a soft musical sound that Elias had never heard from her before. "You are remarkable. I should have prepared for your species more carefully. I did not think it possible to disrupt probabilities so completely." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Disrupt probabilities? Yes," she said. "I observe civilizations for their potential outcomes. Most species follow predictable patterns. Humans, you break the pattern in ways I cannot fully model. You live, adapt, and care in ways that defy calculation." Elias nodded slowly. "I guess we're full of surprises." Later that day, a small communicator light blinked on the wall. Elias opened it casually, expecting routine station messages. Instead, a message appeared from a galactic monitoring authority. "Elias Rowan, your module has been flagged for unauthorized habitation. You are requested to report your status and resident immediately." He frowned. "Resident? You mean Era?" Era, observing from across the room, tilted her head. "It appears the galaxy has noticed." "Not you, not the station, but the two of us together." Elias scratched his head. "Why would anyone care?" She approached him and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Because I am significant. My presence is not trivial. I have served as advisor to empires, strategist in conflicts, and observer of worlds. And now I am staying here, with a human, without oversight. The galaxy does not know what to do with this." Elias laughed softly, but there was a tension beneath it. "Well, they can try to figure it out. I'm not moving." Era smiled faintly. "I would not expect you to. Humans have a kind of stubbornness that defies prediction." Over the next few days, small groups of officials appeared at the station, observing from afar. They did not approach the module, but their sensors recorded everything. How Era moved, how Elias interacted with her, the way he adapted to her needs. Reports were filed, probabilities calculated, and warnings issued. But inside the module, life continued quietly. Era began helping Elias in ways that went beyond observation. She suggested adjustments to the hydroponic systems, tweaks to the module's gravity fields, and even minor improvements to the energy recycling units. All her suggestions were precise, efficient, and elegant. Yet Elias implemented them with a human touch, adding his own improvisations, slight errors, and personal modifications. The results were functional, and often better than Era expected. "You humans," she said one afternoon as they adjusted a small robotic arm together, "you take precision and bend it with creativity. You do not follow logic blindly. You transform it." Elias shrugged. "We call it life." Era watched him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke in a tone that held both awe and curiosity. "If all humans acted this way, if every species observed you, they would find the galaxy unpredictable. They would not know how to respond to your ingenuity." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why we're still here. Maybe the galaxy just doesn't expect us to make room for others, to care without reward, to adapt without calculation." Era nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But the question remains, how long before the galaxy decides that unpredictability is unacceptable?" Elias considered this, then shook his head. "Then we keep living anyway. We adapt. We make space. We figure it out together." Era paused, her gaze thoughtful. "You do not realize yet how important your actions are. By simply existing this way, you are changing expectations. Civilizations, rules, predictions, all are shifting because of small human choices." Elias looked at her, puzzled. "Small choices?" "Yes," she said. "Providing shelter without expectation, repairing things without reward, creating space for others, these are small gestures, but their impact ripples outward. Slowly, imperceptibly, humans alter the galaxy's calculations." He smiled softly. "Well, I guess I'll take that as a compliment." Days turned into weeks. Officials continued to monitor from afar, yet no one interfered. The galaxy was cautious, uncertain of what to do with a human who offered space freely to a high-value refugee. Meanwhile, Era continued her observations, noting not just Elia's actions, but his reasoning, his empathy, and the quiet ways he shaped the module into a home. "You are fascinating," she said one evening as they watched the planet below shimmer in sunlight. "Not because of what you do, but because of how you do it. You act without calculation, yet your results are profound. You create stability where none was expected." Elias chuckled. "I don't think about it that way. I just do what feels right." Era shook her head. "That is precisely what makes it remarkable. The galaxy underestimates humans because it expects efficiency to override empathy. But you live differently. You survive differently. You matter differently." Elias looked at her quietly, feeling the weight of her words. He had always lived modestly, never expecting recognition or impact. And yet, here was a being who had witnessed empires, wars, and strategies across star systems, declaring that his simple acts, giving space, offering help, sharing life, were extraordinary. The night passed slowly, filled with quiet conversation, shared meals, and careful observation. Era's presence had begun to change the rhythm of the module. Small adjustments Elias made for her comfort became permanent fixtures. He found himself thinking about her needs before his own, anticipating challenges, and solving problems before they arose. In return, Era adapted to his imperfect human methods, adding her efficiency without removing the warmth, the unpredictability, and the life that defined the module. Then, one morning, a message arrived, not from the monitoring authorities, but from an unexpected source. Era read it aloud, her voice calm but filled with subtle tension. "Your presence with a human is causing anomalies. Recommend immediate review of your residence. Do not underestimate the influence of small, human decisions on the galaxy at large." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Influence? I'm just living my life." Era smiled faintly. "And that is precisely why the galaxy is unsettled. Humans do not act for status, power, or calculation. They act because it is necessary or right or kind, and that creates unpredictability." Elias shook his head. "Well, then the galaxy will have to adjust." Era considered him carefully. "Yes, it already is." The days that followed were filled with quiet anticipation. Officials monitored, calculations adjusted, reports filed. And yet, inside the module, Elias and Era continued to live simply, repairing machines, observing systems, adjusting modules, and sharing meals. Small routines became acts of quiet defiance. Humanity's adaptability, kindness, and curiosity refused to be suppressed by bureaucracy or protocol. "You know," Elias said one evening, "I never thought just keeping a spare room would have this much impact." Era looked at him with a faint smile. "It is not the room, it is the action. Humans make space and the galaxy is noticing. That is what is remarkable, that is what matters." Elias nodded, a quiet pride stirring inside him. He had not planned to change the galaxy. He had only offered a place for someone who had nowhere else to go. And yet, in doing so, he had begun a chain of events that even Era, a being trained to predict outcomes across star systems, could not fully calculate. The stars glittered outside the window, silent witnesses to a quiet rebellion, not one of force or violence, but of simple human generosity. And as Era documented every observation in her precise, careful hand, she realized that humans were not only unpredictable, they were quietly, profoundly transformative. And in that small habitat, high above the blue planet, two beings, one human, one alien, were beginning to change the galaxy in ways that no one, not even the most powerful councils, could have predicted. The orbital station had never seen so many travelers, yet none were arriving for trade, leisure, or work. They were coming for another reason entirely: hope. News of Era's stay with Elias had quietly spread, first through whispers and then through subtle channels. Word traveled in ways no human could control, but humans, as always, had a way of creating impact without seeking it. The first to arrive were beings much like Era, refugees, displaced travelers, and those who had nowhere else to go. They came not for resources, but for the warmth of a human home, for the simple kindness that could not be bought or enforced. Elias welcomed each one in the same quiet, practical way he had welcomed Era. "You have a lot of visitors," Era said one morning, noticing the small crowd gathered in the common area of the module. Elias chuckled softly. "Seems like word gets around. I suppose it makes sense. People hear there's a place where you can just exist and they come." Era shook her head in quiet amazement. "Humans, you are a phenomenon. The galaxy expects control, calculation, hierarchy, and yet you act simply, freely, without expectation, and the galaxy notices. Slowly, imperceptibly, you are changing perceptions." Elias smiled. "I'm just doing what feels right. That's always been enough for me." The newcomers brought stories, cultures, and experiences from countless worlds. Elias listened to each tale, offering space for their voices and attention to their concerns. He never judged, never demanded, never forced them to explain beyond what they wished to share. Era observed closely. She had traveled across star systems, advising empires and influencing the outcomes of entire civilizations. She had never seen an individual exert such quiet influence without authority, without enforcement, without coercion. "They come because you make room," she said one evening, watching a small group settle around the module's tables. "Because you offer space, because you notice them when others would ignore them. That is power, greater than armies, councils, or laws. And you do it without even realizing it." Elias shrugged. "I just know what it's like to be alone. If I can make someone else feel less alone, I will." Era studied him carefully, noting each small act, each unplanned gesture, and the natural way he made room for others. "In every system I have visited, beings are valued for what they can produce, how they can serve, or how they fit the model. You value for what they are. That is unprecedented." Days turned into weeks, and the module grew into a small hub of life and connection. Elias built additional sleeping areas, adjusted gravity fields for comfort, and even started a small library of stories, data pads, and memories for the newcomers to share. Era contributed as well, teaching the refugees practical skills, helping them adapt to station life, and quietly observing the human way of interaction. One evening, as the artificial sunlight dimmed to simulate the station's night cycle, Era turned to Elias with a question she had been holding back. "Do you realize what you are doing?" she asked softly. Elias looked at her, puzzled. "I'm giving people a place to stay." "Isn't that obvious?" Era shook her head. "Not obvious at all. The galaxy expects you to follow rules, to conform to hierarchy, to act within predictable patterns. And yet, here you are, creating something new simply by being human. Each choice you make, each small act of kindness, each adjustment for comfort, each willingness to share, ripples outward. Slowly, other beings begin to follow your example. They seek humans not for instruction or resources, but for possibility. And in doing so, they are changing the expectations of the galaxy itself." Elias smiled faintly. "I'm not trying to change the galaxy. I'm just trying to help where I can." "That is exactly why it works," Era said. "Because you do not act for power, recognition, or control. You act for what is right, for what is necessary, for what feels human. And that is far more influential than any law or strategy I have seen." Over the following cycles, more beings arrived. They brought gifts, ideas, and skills, and in return, Elias gave space, guidance, and encouragement. The module was no longer just a home. It had become a sanctuary, a hub of cooperation and learning, where differences were respected and where every being had a place. Era continued her observations, documenting everything in careful, precise detail. She noted the ways Elias adapted to each new visitor, the way he balanced their needs with the limited resources of the module, and the quiet patience he showed even when challenges arose. She marveled at his ability to improvise, to create solutions that were effective yet kind, precise yet human. Humans, she said one day, speaking aloud more to herself than to Elias, have an ability the galaxy has not yet understood. You do not act out of obligation or expectation. You act out of awareness and care. And in doing so, you disrupt every model, every prediction, every expectation that has ever existed. You are quietly revolutionary. Elias looked up from his workbench, adjusting the temperature of a small water filter. Revolutionary, huh? I just call it living. Era smiled, a rare, soft expression. Perhaps, but living this way is an act of courage. To provide freely, to adapt without calculation, to care without reward. It is a rebellion against every assumption the galaxy has about civilization. And it is beautiful. The station's quiet corridors, once empty and forgotten, now buzzed with life. Travelers shared stories, exchanged knowledge, and learned from one another. They taught Elias things he had never known, and in return he offered the simplest, most profound gift: attention. Era noticed that even the smallest gestures, listening, offering space, repairing a broken device, adjusting a comfort setting, were revolutionary in their own right. One evening she approached Elias as he prepared a simple meal. "Do you realize how many beings are following your example?" she asked quietly. Elias looked at her confused. "Following my example?" "Yes," she said. "They see what you do, how you provide, how you adapt, how you make space, and they begin to act similarly." Slowly, imperceptibly, the galaxy begins to adjust to humans. They are learning that kindness, adaptability, and care are forms of power no one predicted. Elias shook his head, smiling. "I didn't mean to start a movement. I just wanted to help someone who had nowhere else to go." "Exactly," Era said. "And that is why it is working, because it is genuine, because it is human. The galaxy cannot model it, cannot anticipate it, cannot control it. And that is your strength." As the artificial night deepened, Era turned to observe the newcomers. She saw tired travelers sleeping peacefully in spaces Elias had prepared, curious minds exploring the small library, and quiet conversations sparking new ideas. And she realized something profound. Humans did not just survive in the galaxy, they transformed it. Not through dominance or strategy, but through something far more subtle and powerful: the willingness to make space, to offer care, and to act without expectation. "You know," Elias said softly, breaking the silence, "I never thought just keeping a spare room would have this much effect." Era looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the station lights. "It is not the room, it is the choice, the willingness to act with care. The courage to make space, that is what transforms worlds, and humans, you do it naturally without even knowing the impact you have." Elias smiled, a quiet satisfaction warming his chest. "Then I suppose we keep doing it, one day, one person at a time." "Exactly," Era said. "One action at a time. And the galaxy is learning, slowly but surely, that humanity cannot be ignored, calculated, or controlled. You are quietly, profoundly influential, and all because you offer what no one else does: space, kindness, and care." Outside the habitat module, the stars continued their silent journey across the dark sky. Inside, the small group of travelers continued to live, learn, and share. And in the quiet orbit of the station, humanity's quiet rebellion unfolded, not with weapons, not with force, not with domination, but with simple, relentless kindness. Era returned to her notebook, writing with careful precision. Humans are impossible to predict. They act without expectation, they adapt without calculation, they care without reward. They create space for others, and in doing so, they transform everything around them. This is not power in the traditional sense. This is influence without coercion. This is the quiet rebellion of kindness, and I am witnessing it. Elias glanced at her over the small meal he prepared. "You write a lot about us," he said with a small laugh. "I am recording what matters," she replied. What you do, what humans do, matters more than you realize." He smiled quietly, feeling the weight of her words. He had not set out to change the galaxy. He had only offered a place for someone who had nowhere else to go. And yet, in doing so, he had sparked something extraordinary, a chain of acts that would ripple across star systems, challenging assumptions, redefining expectations, and showing the galaxy what it truly meant to be human. And in that small habitat, high above the blue planet, Elias and Era continued their quiet work. One action, one choice, one act of care at a time. Humanity's influence grew, not through force, but through the simple, transformative power of kindness. The orbital transit station glimmered softly under the distant stars, spinning silently in the black sky. What had once been a quiet, almost forgotten outpost had transformed into something entirely different. It was no longer just a stop along trade routes or a resting point for starships. It had become a hub of life, learning, and connection. Elias Rowan moved through his habitat module with calm efficiency, adjusting small systems here, repairing tiny machines there, and quietly ensuring the comfort of the growing number of beings who now called this place a temporary home. Each step he took carried the unassuming power of humanity, care, attention, and the willingness to make space for others. Era, now fully integrated into the module's rhythm, watched him with a quiet admiration. She had spent centuries observing civilizations, advising empires, and shaping the fate of entire worlds. And yet, here she was, witnessing something entirely unexpected: the subtle, transformative power of a single human being. "You realize this station is no longer just a station," Era said softly one morning as Elias worked on the hydroponic system. "It is a hub of possibility. Others follow your example. They see your kindness, your care, your willingness to make space, and they begin to do the same." Elias shrugged, focused on adjusting the water flow. "I never wanted to create a hub. I just wanted to help people who had nowhere else to go." "And yet you have," Era replied, her voice calm but firm. "Not because of ambition, not because of strategy, but because you acted with humanity. That is more powerful than anything I have ever witnessed." As the cycles passed, more travelers arrived. They came from distant worlds, from civilizations thought lost or oppressed, from ships that had nowhere else to dock. And every one of them found a home, however small, within Elias' module. No bureaucracy, no obligation, no expectation, just space, care, and the quiet consistency of human hospitality. Era began documenting everything in careful detail, her records filling data pads with observations, notes, and reflections. She wrote about the subtle ways Elias adapted to the needs of others, the patience he showed, and the quiet ingenuity that allowed so many different beings to coexist in a single, modest space. "The galaxy expects humans to be predictable," she wrote one evening, her handwriting precise and deliberate. "It expects calculation, efficiency, obedience to rules. And yet, humans act differently. They make room for others. They offer care without expectation. They adapt without hesitation. And in doing so, they transform the very systems around them. I am beginning to understand why the galaxy underestimated them. Humans are not merely resilient, they are quietly revolutionary." Elias noticed her writing but did not comment. He had grown accustomed to Era's meticulous records. To him, it was enough to live each day with care, to repair what was broken, and to make room for those who needed it. Yet, he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his simple acts were creating something larger than himself. One afternoon, a group of young travelers approached Elias with a question. They were curious, eager, and full of questions about the stars, the station, and the strange human who had made space for so many. "How do you do it?" one asked. "How do you make room for all of us? How do you keep everything running?" Elias smiled, kneeling to adjust a small hovering droid that had malfunctioned. "I don't do it perfectly. I make mistakes, I learn, I try again. and mostly I listen. I notice what people need and I do what I can to help." Era watched quietly, noting the expressions on the faces of the young travelers. They were learning something profound without realizing it, that care, attention, and human adaptability were more powerful than any law, weapon, or calculation. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The station continued its silent orbit, but inside Elia's module, life had blossomed. The space had grown, systems had expanded, and the community had strengthened. And through it all, Elias remained humble, never seeking recognition or reward, simply acting with the quiet integrity of someone who understood what it meant to be human. Then one morning, a message arrived, not from the monitoring authorities, not from empires, not from councils, but from the galaxy itself, as though the universe were acknowledging the quiet revolution unfolding on the station. The message was simple. Humans are a species that cannot be ignored. Their actions, small and unassuming, ripple through the galaxy in ways unforeseen. Observation is recommended, caution is advised. Respect their space or learn from them. Elias read the message aloud to Era, who nodded slowly. "This confirms what I have been recording. The galaxy is beginning to notice, not because humans seek power, but because they create possibility wherever they exist. Your actions, your choices, matter more than you realize." Elias chuckled softly. "I never wanted to change the galaxy. I just wanted to help someone who had nowhere else to go." "And yet you have," Era replied. "One action, one choice, one act of kindness at a time. The galaxy adjusts to your presence." Slowly, imperceptibly, humans are shaping the universe without even knowing it. That evening, as the artificial sun dimmed and stars glittered beyond the habitat's windows, Elias and Era stood together, watching the newcomers gather for a quiet meal. They laughed softly, exchanged stories, and shared knowledge. The station was alive, not with power or authority, but with connection, understanding, and possibility. "You know," Elias said quietly, "I always thought having a place to stay was enough. I never imagined it could change anything." Era turned to him, her expression filled with awe. "It is not the place that changes the galaxy. It is the action, the willingness to create space, to care, to act without expectation. That is the essence of humanity. That is why you are extraordinary." The months passed, and Elia's simple acts continued to ripple outward. Travelers left with knowledge, hope, and new ideas, carrying with them the quiet lessons of human adaptability and care. Others arrived, inspired by what they had heard, seeking not only shelter but the possibility of connection and understanding. And each new arrival reinforced the truth Era had observed from the very beginning. Humanity's power was not in force, domination, or control, but in the ability to make room, to offer care, and to act with integrity. One day, as Elias repaired a small water filtration unit, Era approached him with a question she had been pondering. "Do you realize," she asked softly, "that the galaxy is beginning to shift because of you?" Elias looked up, surprised. "Shift? How?" "By observing you," Era explained. "Other species are learning that kindness, adaptability, and care are not weaknesses. They are strengths. They are forces that cannot be predicted or controlled. And slowly, imperceptibly, the expectations of civilizations are changing. Humanity is influencing the galaxy not through conquest but through being itself." Elias paused, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "I never thought of it that way. I just wanted to give someone a place to stay." "And that was enough," Era said. "Because human action in its simplicity has power beyond calculation. It transforms what it touches. And now, the galaxy is learning that humans create possibility wherever they exist." As night fell over the station, Elias and Era watched the stars together. The module was quiet now, filled with the soft hum of life, the gentle laughter of travelers, and the unspoken understanding that something extraordinary had taken root. "You know," Elias said, "maybe this is what it means to be human, to make room, to care, to adapt, and in doing so to change the world one small action at a time. Era nodded, a rare smile touching her features. Exactly, and you have shown me what humanity truly is. Not as a species to be measured or calculated, but as a force of possibility, a source of transformation, a quiet revolution in the galaxy itself. The stars outside shimmered, silent witnesses to the quiet revolution unfolding within the small habitat module. And within that space, high above the blue planet, Elias and Era continued their work, one act of kindness at a time. In time, the module became more than a home. It became a symbol, a testament to what humans could achieve not through force, not through power, but through simple, unassuming acts of care. Travelers spoke of it across star systems, and slowly, the galaxy began to understand that humanity's strength lay not in conquest, but in the willingness to make space, to offer kindness, and to act with integrity. An Era who had once been a being of calculation and strategy finally understood what it meant to witness humanity in full. They create possibility. They make room. They act with care. And in doing so, they transform the galaxy, quietly, beautifully, profoundly. Elias, for his part, continued to live simply, unaware of the extraordinary impact he had made. He repaired, he nurtured, he adapted, and he offered space to those who had nowhere else to go. And in doing so, he proved a simple truth. Humanity's greatest power is not in domination, not in force, not in numbers or strategy, but in the courage to care, the willingness to create possibility, and the quiet strength to make space for others. And in that small habitat module, orbiting silently above a blue and green planet, the galaxy began to change. Not with fanfare, not with weapons, not with fear, but with the quiet, enduring, unassuming power of human kindness.